Airing first on Asheville FM, WSFM LP 103.3 in Asheville, this is The Final Straw Radio, a weekly anarchist and anti-authoritarian radio show broadcasting out of occupied Salagi land in southern Appalachia. We bring you voices and perspectives from projects and struggles all around the world.
First up, we'll share an interview with Fav, a radical who recently participated in the anti-coal occupation at the village of Lutzerath, aka the Zad of the Rhineland in Western Germany, against the company RWE. We talk about RWE's push to break resistance at Lutzerath and the currently calm Hambach forest, which activists fear will be attacked by RWE and their goons. More info at the website lutzerathlebt.info/en. And you'll find a transcript of this interview at our website and in the show notes. We'll also be sharing 2 segments from the 2022 episode of Bad News from the Anarchist and Anti-Authoritarian A radio network. You'll hear a short update from the 2022 anti-racist football tournament, aka soccer for you ignorant Yankees out there, and an update from the Free Social Radio 1431 on labor strikes by the Malamatina Winery workers in Thessaloniki, and the pretrial release of 3 prisoners accused of participation in Anarchist Action Organization, which ramped up arsons in the last year. To hear the rest of the Bad News episode, check out the links in our show notes. And now a few announcements. There's an article on avtonom.org/en calling for support for the 6 anti-fascist prisoners of the Tyrmen case in Russia through a fundraiser to cover legal costs and to write them letters. And there's more information on the case and how to support them that you can find in a link in our show notes. Colorado Spring anti-fascists just published a short and thoughtful guide to creating doxes of people on the far right. You can find it at cospringsantifa.noblogs.org/best-practices. And there's a Firefund fundraiser for revolutionary prisoners in Greece. This is from the text of the website, a portion of it. After all these years of the continuous persecution and imprisonment, we consider the existence of the Solidarity Fund topical and necessary, being one more stone in the mosaic being built by the multiform struggles against prisons, which urge us to act against one of the major pillars of the system of oppression and exploitation, against the crime of incarceration that reproduces class inequalities, fear, and submission. You can find more about the prisoners in particular and how to support the Tamayo 22 Fund, which is at firefund.net/TAMEIO and the digit 2 and the digit 2. The 2023 Certain Days Freedom for Political Prisoners calendars are now available for pre-order, and there are ordering details in the show notes, including info on bulk orders. So we suggest you take a look at that. The Certain Days Freedom for Political Prisoners calendar is a joint fundraising and educational project between outside organizers across North America and political prisoner Jinachli, state name Alvaro Luna Hernandez, in Texas. If you're in the US and you want to get individual or bulk sales, you can visit burningbooks.com and find the calendars there. If you're buying 10 or more, you can use the discount code BULK, all capitals, and it drops a third off of the price of each one. You can use that as a fundraising endeavor if you'd like for your project. Or you can get individual copies there. In Canada, you can order 1 to 9 copies from leftwingbooks.net, or for bulk copies, you can order them from certaindays.org/order. Prisoner copies, only $8, and they're only for people in prison or jail. You can find those at certaindays.org as well. If you'd like to support The Final Straw, there are a few easy ways. First up, you can like and share our content on social media platforms out there. Rate and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google, Amazon, and the rest, as it makes it easier to find the content. You can also share episodes you enjoy with folks in your life. Use the content in discussion groups or print off the transcribed zines for reading and sharing. More info on how to follow us and find our streams at tfsr.wtf. You can find our zines at tfsr.wtf/zines. It's all lowercase. If you have money to spare, we have merchandise for sale on our Big Cartel, or you can make a one-time or recurring donation via Venmo, PayPal, LiberaPay, or you can become a patron at patreon.com/TFSR for one-time or recurring thank you gifts and early access to some interviews. More on this at tfsr.wtf/support. And finally, you can get us on your local airwaves to increase the audience of our listeners. More on that at tfsr.wtf/radio. And thank you so much for all the support. And on that note, thank you so much to KRJF in Santa Rosa, California, where I'm currently doing this recording. Y'all are wonderful and your studio is cute.
Would you introduce yourself for the audience and say a little bit about Lutzerath?
I'm Fav. Let's say I'm a tourist, doing my best to make the most of Eurovisas. This summer of 2022 has led me to some places that are part of what is called the Zad of Rhineland. So I wanted to share some of my knowledge and experience of any ongoing struggle that's been happening already for years in the Rhineland of Germany, and is likely to be intensifying very soon, perhaps by the time you listen to this interview. In the middle of nowhere, west of Dusseldorf, there's a tiny village called Lutzerath that was being occupied as an environmental defense action. And I recently spent some time there to see what's going on. For starters, let's say that my account and knowledge of this struggle is limited, and I in no way speak on behalf of the occupation or as one of their media persons. Actually, at the time I was there, their media collective didn't seem very functional, at least for non-Germanic audiences. So that's one of the reasons why I'm doing this interview. You may read that this interview is a kind of recollection of everything I heard from reliable, engaged people in the Rhineland occupation and beyond. And there's aspects I can't cover to not compromise anyone. This occupation rose up over the last few years as an opposition to massive coal extraction pits, in addition, or as a kind of follow-up to the Hambacher forest occupation, which is still going on, just about 35 kilometers to the south. By the way, there are quite a few, though much smaller, forest occupations elsewhere in Germany that have sprung up over the last few years, opposing gentrification projects or other kinds of industrial developments, like the Besch occupation near Trier, for instance, and another in Bodensee. This one's got more similarities with the better-known former Zad of Notre-Dame-des-Landes in Brittany, France, in a way that this is a rural area reclaimed in majority by activists and random squatters of different views. And it's a typical farm setting with the infrastructure that comes with it. But it's hard to talk about Lutzerath without talking about Hambi, or the Hambacher forest. The core of Germany's industrial complex, and that is to say the industrial center of one of Europe's biggest industrial leviathans, is located around 5 or 6 cities at the center of the Rhineland, the major ones being Düsseldorf and Köln. This overdeveloped region has been home of Rheinmetall, ThyssenKrupp, and other industrial powerhouses, also directly related to the car and military industries. The power source for this massive industry and all its urban infrastructure lies mostly in an area west of these cities where countless nuclear power plants and coal mines have shaped the landscape for several decades. A few years ago, the German government, under pressure by environmentalist organizations such as the Green Party, decided to stop nuclear energy development altogether. This led to the obvious necessity to look to alternatives to feed the ever-growing energy demands. Coal, already being controversial as an energy source, had become, in parallel, the target of opposition, being arguably an ecologically devastating and unsustainable energy source. As a matter of fact, lignite coal is not only a major source of arsenic pollution, but also its extraction means the sheer destruction of vast areas where life used to thrive, be it farm life or the little remaining wildlife in the previously untouched forests. Hambacher was one of these old-growth forests, and also an ancient commons, dating back to medieval times, that was privatized in the 1970s when RWE was given a pass to exploit the area, subduing locals into selling their house or farms, invading and destroying the forest, and leaving a gaping hole behind. In the late 2010s, only small portions of the forest were left, a few pouches of green around vast deserts a few kilometers across. It was not the first nor the last mega crater in the region. So, around 2013, a bunch of eco-activists started a legal opposition camp named The Meadows by Hambacher Forest, from where gradually tree-sitting houses, forest barricades on the main paths, and later autonomous camps, or barrios as they're called, sprouted at several spots across the forest. In parallel, there were a few clandestine sabotage actions, the boldest being the power cables of a digger being destroyed, and several skirmishes with RWE security. I also heard of a police chopper being zapped with a high-power laser pointer. The struggle culminated in the summer of 2018, where a huge eviction operation by the German police lasted for several weeks, and equally many forest defenders came in to support. Then, some forest riots happened and all that sort of thing. A ruling was declared by the courts suspending the eviction attempt without, on the other hand, suspending RWE's extractive activities. So, Hambi since then has been in an uneasy stalemate with RWE and the German government. Coal kept being extracted, just not in any part of the forest that people could still occupy, at least for now. The land destruction is not the only issue, since the diggers, as they're called, these monstrous, gigantic excavators, eat out the earth in a vertical manner. The cliffs of these pits aren't sloped enough for waters in the surrounding aquifers to be retained. So in order to prevent the groundwater from flowing into the pits and keeping the machines and workers from doing their operations, a vast array of water pumps is slowly draining the water from the aquifers, at an area of up to 1 kilometer roughly. These pumps are found all over the place, around either Hambi or Lutzerath, and in the case of the former, are slowly killing the trees and other plant life by slowly drying up what's left of the forest. As I heard, some of these pumps got sabotaged, although I don't know how long ago that was. RWE is everywhere in this region. They own entire areas, some deserted towns, roads, and rails. Trying to make sense of the latest maps in the area west of Düsseldorf or Köln is quite a challenge, more so if you're trying to find your way to some obscure occupation somewhere within it. As what you'll see, for instance, on any online map is a mess of roads and villages cut off in so many places with vast, mysterious blank spaces. Well, they're blank spaces because, really, there's nothing there. These are just these steep cliffs falling down 100 meters into the desert. A kind of peninsula surrounded by this sea of blank around 2/3 of the way around. And the diggers, those gigantic machines of destruction, just keep slowly eating the ground close by. There's no knowing on my part of what are the intents or plans of the several groups and individuals occupying this space here in Lutzerath. The last family of farmers to own a house in the village had their property contract expired on September 1st, and now it is claimed that the whole village will be evictable by October 1st. The latest installment of the monthly music festival is planned that Lutzerath holds is planned for the 23rd to the 27th of September, so likely right now as you're hearing this. And these seem to be very musically diverse events with some predominance of electro or dance music. Drinks and food are all by donation. The several hangars that previously were used as garages for large farming machinery are now providing great rave party spaces with excellent acoustics, and also a pretty neat skate park. Meals are being served at least twice daily, and there's coffee and tea for most of the day. Also, there's plenty of space left to squat, camp around, or tree sit. So, to anyone near the Rhineland who might be hearing this and interested in taking part in a living occupation against the death industry, there's still time, and perhaps this is the best time to come.
Thank you for that introduction. I have a few follow-up questions. Since the suspension of gas supplies from Russia, this is because of the war in Ukraine and sanctions against the Russian state. Gazprom cut off deliveries of so-called natural gas to many places in the east and center of Europe, which will be affecting the winter heating of many people. The quite dirty lignite coal under the soil in Lutzerath is currently being used for manufacturing industries of cars and military vehicles, but how much will the lignite be used to fuel house heating for regular people in the area due to the lack of Russian gas? In other words, how much of this coal is slated for human survival this winter versus increased production of war machines and fancy cars?
Oh, that's a tough one. There's data by the German market study group AGEB from 2021 that says that 203 terawatts per hour is consumed by the primary and secondary industry, 145 by the trades and services, the tertiary industries, and 126 terawatts per hour is consumed by households. So if you combine all the industries, this makes the consumption to be 348 terawatts of power per hour, where households just take a bit more than a third of this. But it's hard to tell which energy sources are really powering up the houses, or which are people in more urban areas getting energy from the surplus produced by this energy industry. Heating masses of buildings means a huge demand of energy. That keeps increasing. I think the restarting of coal power has to do with this necessity of providing heating this winter for homes, not just for the industry, in support of the, quote, renewable, unquote, sources that might just not be enough. If the war keeps going in Ukraine, Germany will require a lot of power in order to keep producing all of this hardware for the lucrative war profiteering. But this could also likely mean some insane rises in energy bills. Contemporary war industry is running with energy systems dating back to before World War I that are unsustainable while eating the rural areas like the Langoliers in some old Stephen King book. So it's possible that this industry might be in a more fragile position than it seemed. I guess we'll just have to see.
Could you tell us a little bit about how the occupation is going?
I found Lutzerath to be well organized in the typical German activist ways. Maybe actually a little bit too much. There's something odd with living in the relic of old rural life, waiting to be torn down eventually, or maybe not. It's being at the physical edge of the apocalypse. So there's something to put into question about what is being defended here or what we're fighting against, since every time when people from several backgrounds are holding up against one big antagonist, like here, RWE, you end up with some strange bedfellows that might totally not be on the same page with you. Here there are a diversity of political leanings, agendas, and views, ranging from Christian leftists to your usual social media anarchoids, then the more eco-anarchy or anti-civ leaning people, as well as the obvious XR or Extinction Rebellion activists, and of course some undefined randos like me. But this is a very rough portrait and not too relevant, as long as you understand that there's an opening for people of different views to co-occupy the space and support the occupation. Obviously, there are things that I cannot say anything about, not only due to security culture, but because I just didn't know everyone there long enough. The vast domination of the German language in communications and organizing doesn't help much for foreign supporters. But I've seen some efforts by some to compensate for this, like trying to make conversations bilingual or translating messages on public billboards. I'm not under the impression that it's ever been as international friendly as the former Zod was. And I think Hambacher Forest Camp tends to have a more international presence, though there's always a possibility for improvement, as anyways, this doesn't seem to be a space monopolized by a particular group as far as I know. Though some groups have monopolized more specific areas. Like, for instance, the main kitchen space and 2 houses, at least, were still under COVID masking policies, which reflects a heavy communitarian and socio-sanitary imperative of socialist-leaning people, though it can make a few people behave like literal cops. For the houses, it can be understandable, but there's something obliquely arbitrary and ill-informed in imposing masks to an outdoor well-vented kitchen because, quote, COVID. It's my opinion, all right, but especially in times where countries are reopening and most COVID measures are disappearing, this seems rather off. Hopefully they no longer do this stuff. Also, there are 2 clothing optional outdoor areas, but for the rest of the village, everyone's expected to be dressed. And yes, there's the white dreadlocks controversy that's present there too. Despite these issues, the atmosphere is very welcoming and everyone's treated as a family member. So like other Zods, or zones to defend, this is not by default an anarchist occupation, even though there clearly are anarchist elements and sensibilities. But that shouldn't drive people away, if you're not an anarchist. There can be more than one public kitchen, for instance, and there are already common living spaces that don't seem to care much about COVID policies. Here's an observation of tactical concern. Obviously, since Lutzerath is surrounded by coal pits, there is only about 1/3 of the village that can be physically accessed. And then only by a few small rural roads, meaning that if there are police and or security blockades at some point, the village can be cut off quite easily. So, logically, whenever there's a motivation to defend the occupation, it would have to do that with securing openings to the area, or at least to make such kettling by security forces too hard or costly to maintain. This is not like Hambi, where there are many, many entry and exit points in several directions, along with the fields that can be used in many ways. Obviously, barricades have been built at the main entrances of Lutzerath and will be defended to some extent, but there most likely will be a serious police raid operation of the whole camp at some point. And there's word coming from an RWE insider who I can't say more about. This was told to me through a long-term occupier who meets this person once in a while, that both of the occupations against RWE would be targeted more or less at the same time by an eviction operation. This would happen between now and the winter, where, if I get it correctly, Lutzerath would be attacked first and then Hambi would be evicted in the meantime, profiting from the land defenders' mobilization at Lutzerath, a diversionary tactic of sorts. This is hearsay and can be taken with a grain of salt, but what is certain is that the current context in Europe leans in the direction of a brutal, hasty eviction campaign by the German government, of course supported by the RWE goons. On the latter, it's an important detail to know, especially for anti-fascists willing to come support either occupation, that RWE is hiring fascist Turkish organization Grey Wolves, and in several villages, at least those surrounding Hambi, they inhabit houses that were handed over to them by the company. It's known to everyone in a barrio of the Hambi occupation. Not all members of this group are fascists. Some did it only to get a job and a house. So not all of them are the enemy. But yes, this is an enemy that can be very dangerous without taking proper defensive and or deterrent measures. So it'd be great that if there's more people coming to support the occupation, that this is not seen as separate occupations, but as 2 or 3 fronts within the same battle to defend the land, and that any of these occupations are equally important to defend. I said 3 because there's also this much smaller forest defense occupation that grew up somewhere north of Lutzerath. Hambi also provides a lot more space, including wild forest space, for groups and individuals to come, camp, and support the occupations. And like I said, it's more easily accessible, especially for the logistics side of things. It's worth noting to that regards that those coming should be as autonomous as possible food-wise, meaning bring your food and bring your water. This applies to the matter of bringing dogs to the forest and being accountable for their behavior. There was also a call last year, reflecting apparent possibilities, to occupy empty houses in Mosaic, the closest village next to the forest. I haven't heard much about this, but it could be looked into. More occupations at different places usually means creating a bigger clusterfuck. That's harder to manage for authorities. So I don't want to be this anarcho-commander just telling you what the opportunities are and trying to identify what the needs are. But there is already a legally owned activist camp in the south of Mosaic where newcomers can get some help for most matters. Oh, I forgot to say earlier that it's not the first time that Lutzerath is under threat of eviction. That exactly a year ago, there was also an eviction being expected, though this wasn't exactly the same situation, both locally and more globally. First off, there wasn't yet a war in Ukraine and a total economic split between NATO countries and Russia.
You've mentioned the ecological devastation to the local area, digging a huge pit and drying the forests and arsenic poisoning nearby. Can you remind listeners a little more about how destructive lignite coal is, even in comparison to other types of coal? I assume that if RWE is able to get both into the mine in Hambacher Forest and the so-called Garzweiler 2 mine in Lutzerath, would cause immeasurable damage to the local environment as well as the climate.
Lignite coal is a soft type of coal being burned in boilers for running steam turbines that produce electricity, including heating houses, but also it's predictable that this is the stuff that was used to power up the German metal and chemical industries before nuclear power. Since lignite has got the lowest carbon composition of all types of coal, the softer it is, the less the carbon, with black hard coal having the highest amounts of carbon. And lignite holds humidity better than other types of coal. It requires a lot more to produce inputs needed for industrial use and massive energy grids, as just like wood, when it's wet, it demands a lot more effort to keep it burning than well-dried wood. Brown coal has less than half the caloric value than hard black coal, which doesn't make it the most energy efficient fuel, but also at the same time, it is the most polluting relatively. So if we just stick to carbon emissions, lignite is much higher for the same megawatts per hour ratio than if using hard coal for that reason. Then there's also many other pollutants with higher concentrations of sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxide that are causing smog and respiratory illness in humans, as well as heavy metals and even a level of radioactivity. The other major concern is the release of arsenic when it is burned. If I read the studies correctly, according to the research, brown coal, due to being alkali, holds more arsenic than the acidic hard coal, as ashes will leach in less arsenic from it than the latter. By the way, if you want to see how demented these capitalist quote-unquote visionaries are, look at their long-term plan for these pits. They want to transform these deserts into lakes. Good idea, huh? Yes. So, they are slowly drying up the forests and farmlands around, taking the water from the aquifers away, so that when the coal mines are depleted, or the coal loses its value or gets replaced for good, they're going to do a nice eco-facelift for the region by filling up these pits with water from who knows where, and then develop the real estate around them by marketing eco-smart green towns to sell at high prices to yuppies from the big cities. I even heard that Morsenik is planned to have all of its houses revalued and resold eventually. This looks like this is the eventual plan for RWE as the owners.
On the topic of RWE giving houses to gray wolves, most of our audience won't be familiar with this formation. Can you speak in a little more detail about who gray wolves are and how it seems RWE is composing a scenario that will exacerbate at least the appearance of ethnic or nationalist tensions alongside ideas of Germany having national energy independence from places like Russia? I'm glad that you noted how important it was to realize that not all people relocated there are fascists.
Yeah, so the Grey Wolves are a fascist organization that are well known and active in countries with a large Turkish migrant population. Germany and Austria having the biggest ones in Europe, as far as I know. And the Grey Wolves appear to work as a kind of mafia, for instance, perhaps like the Sicilian mafia was to Italian immigrants in North America. Only these operate with a much more political angle, extremist and brutally racist at that. And they've been engaged in ethnic murderous violence against Kurdish people, not only in Turkey and Syria, but even in Germany. They're also, of course, anti-feminist and queer and transphobic. What I heard is that their violence isn't talked about as much in the mainstream, as it is violence of a rather predominant minority upon other and weaker minorities. They appeared in the 1970s in Turkey, when they committed several mass killings of Kurds, and there's been several of these episodes of ethnic cleansings later on, like in the 1990s. Grey Wolves are ultra-nationalists in favor of a kind of Turkish Islamic state, which Erdogan has pretty much made happen, and they seek to extend the Turkish influence abroad as well. Those I saw around Hambacher were typical conservative bootlicker types, though not very dangerous unless they decided for some reason to mobilize with their organization. They're the ones found watching from their cars for people coming in and out of the forest. There's records of petty violence against Hambi activists, like beatings, but also equally there are records of Hambi people attacking these cars. So nowadays, they keep a distance from the forest. Any incomers would do well to stay away from the view of those suspicious cars parked in the middle of nowhere. There's one often parked near the exit of Morsenik to watch the road south of the Hambacher forest, which is the most regular watch. But there are others parked in other strategic spots less regularly. More is known about them by the occupiers than I can tell here.
The occupation of the space is obviously very important, but as the local residents are forced to move out, it seems more isolating in the build-up to an upcoming fight for the land. In the struggle for the ZAD in Notre-Dame-des-Landes, it was important to bring the fight to the nearby city of Nantes, where there were government and corporate offices to target, media to be seen by, and more sympathetic people to allow participation of. Can you talk about direct action you've heard of in the direct area, but also other places and cities in support of the occupation in Lutzerath against the mine?
Like I said before, there's been quite a few direct actions during the heydays of the Hambacher forest, though I haven't heard of many actions surrounding Lutzerath specifically. But there might be some report backs of actions from the last year in the German media. There was a huge climate change mobilization last August in Hamburg, where you had systematic blockades of industrial ports in the city, super well organized, even though mostly symbolic, not lasting. Likely it was done by Extinction Rebellion, though I'm not totally sure. This action camp and the blockades weren't directly related to Lutzerath, but they concerned the transport of gas, and maybe coal, by sea routes, given that Hamburg remains the main German port hub in the North Sea, and thus the Atlantic, and is much connected to the Rhineland industrial complex. I also suppose that an eviction operation is an opportunity for doing actions in support elsewhere, at least in Germany, but more widely in Europe. As far as I've read, though, there hasn't been such widespread solidarity actions to the crazy levels we've seen in France at the height of the Zod struggle, at least not yet.
I recognize that the drive of this conversation is to bring people as soon as possible to Lutzerath, but for those who are too far away, are there ways they can strike at RWE or the German state for facilitating this ecocide? And where can they find more information about how to get involved in the struggle?
Yeah, there are a few websites for more information, starting with Lutzerlebt.info, which means Lutzerath Remains, LutzerathLebt.info, the related social media pages, and Germany's indie media. Plus a few articles in English here and there, like a pretty good one last year on politicalecology.org, written by Andrea Brock, which was entitled The Final Showdown. But in Germany, you learn about other occupations by word of mouth or by hanging out at some occupation and reading some agitprop and zines, whenever they could be read. And I got a comic book level of German knowledge, but more like kiddie comics at the most, so I'm not exactly fluent. So that's just how I, as a foreigner, have gotten to learn about this struggle. A few people in Hambacher told me about it the same way that I did to you here. Part of the strength of this movement is that it's not that dependent on online communications. While most people I've seen use cell phones like the rest, it's more about building ties, friendships, and affinity groups in real life by just hanging out with others, doing shit together, especially good, helpful, and also fun shit. Beyond that, there's a need to go beyond our national enclaves, just as capital has become globalized and borders usually avail themselves to flows of lightness, commodified coal, lithium, oil, big data, etc. As for how to support such struggles from abroad, well, I can point to the obvious that there's a huge pressure for answering to the energy demands in general, as our ever-increasing consumption of data, oil, and other related energy keeps demanding more and more, which can cause an economic catastrophe. There's no RWE in Indonesia or Canada or Chile or the US, I think, but context is everything. You gotta look, I think, in what are the most sensitive, looked after moneymakers for the powerful billionaire overlords of the society. Nowadays, it appears to be in lithium, rare earth minerals, and uranium. It's still very important to the nuclear industry in pushing for a quote-unquote fresh start to energy. The most valued commodities are logically those hurting the biggest pockets, at least if that is what you're after. That's just a distant assumption on my part. My own interest and intent is out of the question here. I'm just a tourist anyway. Though the health of the environment is a concern to everyone living on this planet, right? Sending salutations and praise to all the other few vagabonds out there still living wild and free, despite all the ever-increasing state controls. And a big shout out to the Atlanta forest occupation.
Remember, it's those wheels that are trying to make us
The Final Straw is a proud member of the Channel Zero network of anarchist podcasts, and here's a jingle from another member of CZN.
Hello, and welcome to the Milwaukee Lit Supply podcast. The Milwaukee Lit Supply is a project distributing radical literature in the community and across the fences into Wisconsin prison.
The Lit Supply is a member of the Channel Zero network of anarchist podcasts.
On this podcast, we talk about one of the radical zines from the Lit Supply catalog each month.
It is June. It is July.
It is August.
And this month we are going to be discussing colonization and decolonization. A World Without Police.
Blood in My Eye by George Jackson.
This author does a really good job at breaking it down and having like really approachable.
The best revolutionaries you're going to find are in prison.
You gotta change the very structure and the framework that you're working in.
I just thought that was like a dope realization.
If you would like to learn more about our project, get involved, or come on our podcast, go to our website at mkelitsupply.com.
And now, this recent edition of Bad News, Angry Voices from Around the World. You can find more episodes of that at a-radio-network.org. Bad news.
Bad news for the state.
Bad news for capital.
Bad news for patriarchy.
Bad news for all forms of domination.
Bad news. Angry voices from around the world.
Our monthly info show from anarchist and anti-authoritarian radio projects worldwide.
If these news are bad, I don't want to be good.
Άλλο να βραθείς στην πόλη, μόνος γυρίζεις, ψάχνεις κάτι να βρεις, κάτι να αλλάξει τη νύχτα, να διώξει την πίκρα μιας άδειας φευγά της ζωής. Άλλο να βραθείς εξήλιος και βλέπεις στο νου σου κάτι μέρες παλιές, να αφήσεις στο κόμμα τις μνήμες κι όλα όσα είδες τώρα γίνονται μουσικές. Και όσο θα νιώθεις μονάχος στην πόλη, να ξέρεις νιώθω μονάχος μαζί σου κι εγώ. Έχω πέτρες στην τσάντα και χρώμα στα χέρια και μέσα μου ένα μαύρο γέντο νιώσω αυτή η ζωή θα σε πληγεί. Να ξέρεις την κλασσιά που πνίγομαι κι εγώ. Το σκηνή έλα κόψε λίγο νόημα δώσε.
Hello and welcome to the 16th edition of Bad News, Angry Voices from Around the World, a commonly produced monthly show of the Anarchist and Anti-Authoritarian Radio Network, on this occasion composed by Free Social Radio 1431 AM in Thessaloniki. In this episode we will hear contributions from Anarchist Radio Berlin prepared a piece on the anti-racist football tournament in Ljubljana 2022. Free Social Radio 1431 AM prepared a briefing about the Malamatina factory workers' strike in Thessaloniki and the release of political prisoners Georgia Bulgari and Panos Kalaitzis. Frequenz-A prepared an interview with anarchist collective Feral Crust, based in Manilla, Davao in Philippines, about their work, anarchism and the current situation there. Please enjoy.
Έχω πέτρες στην τσάντα και χρώμα στα χέρια και μέσα μου ένα μαύρο γέντο νιώσω αυτή η ζωή θα σε πληγεί. Να ξέρεις την πλασιά που πνίγομαι κι εγώ. Το σκηνή έλα κόψε λίγο νόημα δώσε. Η νύχτα να με βρεις ζωντανό νιώσω να νιώθεις μονάχος στην πόλη. Ξέρεις νιώθω μονάχος μαζί σου κι εγώ. Έχω πέτρες στην τσάντα και χρώμα στα χέρια και μέσα μου ένα μαύρο γέντο νιώσω αυτή η ζωή θα σε πληγεί. Να ξέρεις την κλασσιά που πνίγομαι κι εγώ. Το σκηνή έλα κόψε λίγο νόημα δώσε. Στη νύχτα να με βρεις ζωντανό νιώσω να νιώθεις μονάχος στην πόλη. Να ξέρεις νιώθω μονάχος μαζί σου κι εγώ. Έχω πέτρες στην τσάντα και χρώμα στα χέρια και μέσα μου ένα μαύρο γέντο νιώσω αυτή η ζωή θα σε πληγεί. Να ξέρεις την κλασσιά που πνίγομαι κι εγώ. Το σκηνή έλα κόψε λίγο νόημα δώσε. Η νύχτα να με βρεις ζωντανό.
So this is our 8th anti-racist football tournament. We organize them twice a year, once in Ljubljana and once in Zagorje.
So I like this tournament, and I'm 9 years in organizing the football matches, especially the referees. So we can have this one-of-a-kind football tournament in Slovenia.
This is kind of to celebrate our principles, but in a light, fun way, to enjoy ourselves, to relax, play some football, have some other activities like children's corners. And everybody is, of course, welcome to participate. Every year we have some different teams that also support this cause, and it's just like this beautiful day of the year.
This tournament is special because the football teams are mixed, and the diversity of the football it's here in this tournament, so everyone can play. Kids, women, male, LGBT, everyone in the same equipe. And that's important because we are here for football, not for money. Because football is the biggest sport in the world, and today it's too much money involved in football. I can say that players they accept referees and rules because they are simple rules. We don't enforce strict rules, so everything is flexible. Only the big mistakes we must have penalties there. For example, we had only 3 yellow cards today. You have really a lot of matches, but it's friendly and in the spirit of fair play, and that's most important thing, fair play.
Some players are also professional, but we try to encourage that everybody can play. So sometimes we have teams that have never even played football before. Some are really on a high level, but we try to encourage this sports behavior, so there's no rivalry and arguing and fighting on the court. So just it's for everybody.
Ich finde die Stimmung voll schön.
I really like the atmosphere.
Also wir stehen hier vor so einem ziemlich...
We are standing in front of a very nice building with pillars and ornaments.
Verzierungen und da führen so Treppenstufen hoch. Und
some stairs go up and there are real trophies in bronze, silver and gold.
Bronze, Silber, Gold.
Ampak zagotovo smo na Brcnemu rasizmu izjemno ponosni, da je to turnir, kjer homofobija, transfobija, rasizem in kakršnikoli nacionalizmi nimajo prostora. 3. mesto so tokrat osvojili naši stari znanci, bratje antinacionale!
Siamo tutti antifascisti! Siamo tutti antifascisti! Siamo tutti antifascisti!
The model is against racism and against all divisions in the society. So the football tournament is opposite of that. Everyone is welcome. Everyone can play. So let's play. football.
Greetings from Greece, from Free Social Radio 1431 AM. For several continuous days since the end of August, the workers of Malamatina, a Greek alcohol factory, gathered outside the factory, continuing their struggle and demanding the revocation of the 15 dismissal of their colleagues, the end of the prosecution against their trade union representatives, and the signing of an operational collective labor agreement. At the same time, they held a press conference informing about the current situation regarding the factory and the blackmailing of the new employer towards the old workers. The Workers' General Assembly decided to hold a strike until the 31st of August. In the face of the vulgar blackmail, the persecution of the union representatives and the repression by the police forces, workers and solidarists gather at the Malamatina factory every day, protecting the strike and the struggle against ownership. They proceeded to a press conference where they explained how the company went bankrupt and was given debts. They informed about the new ownership's continuous blackmailing against the old workers and the employer's general attempt to eliminate the union by firing its members. Their aim is to recruit new workers on 2- and 3-month contracts, unskilled workers, effectively multiplying the risk of industrial accidents, thereby reducing costs and having the possibility of blackmailing new workers by not renewing their contracts. At the 30th of August, and after 7 months of pre-incarceration, at the 6-month hearing process, it was decided that political prisoners Georgia Vulgari and Panos Kalaitzis would be set free until their trial. The two of them, along with Thanos Hatziagellou, were arrested at the 8th of February and are being prosecuted for the case of the Organization of Anarchist Action, after a series of arson attacks. Waiting for the trial, Kalaitzis is not allowed to leave the country and has to show up at the police station twice a month, and Vulgari is constrained in her house by an electronic bracelet. Hatziagellou remains fully imprisoned. This advancement is a good indication of the accusations of the state about the three collapsing at the trial. The trial is supposed to start within a year. Freedom to all political prisoners. Until all are free, no one is free.
This is
Can you maybe first introduce yourself and from the name of which collective are you talking with us today?
Hi there, Frequenz-A, and to all the listeners. Solidarity greetings from the Philippines. This is Nika and Mel. We run Feral Crust Collective.
At the end of 2020, your collective were looking for funds to buy a car and build a second house. Can you tell us about Feral Crust, Info Center and Community? What it is and what are your projects at the moment?
In 2012, we started as an anarchist info shop in Taguig, Metro Manila. By 2016, we moved to Davao City to pursue our idea of setting up a land project that is closer to nature and a bit off from the city. A year later, in 2017, with the help of comrades from the local and international autonomous network who supported us financially, we then got a small piece of land located in remaining forest of Marilog in the rural area of Davao City. It was also the time where we eventually got inspired with ecological anarchist politics and alternatives, such as rewilding and permaculture and other strategies and ways to decolonize while being immersed directly to the land base or nature. Project-wise, we're currently working on house construction more spacious than the first house that we had. The house is intended for volunteers and guests, comrades and visitors, for them to have a space to stay, to meet, to rest, and to sleep on. Every time we visit a space twice a month, we work on weeding and mulching the ground of our area to prepare garden plots. We also did some small earthworks like digging and creating swales, using hand tools. We also planted some trees and bamboo within the boundary and generally organizing related structures within the site. We never had big dreams about our land project, just a basic simple homestead, a communal and info center space, but are more rural based. As a land project, ideally, we strive to have a stable ecosystem guided by permaculture approach and practices. We are also interested in learning and practicing nature-related skills. We also would like to engage in cooperation work and projects with both local and non-local people to further improve bonding and friendship, cultural awareness, and solidarity. We thought that having a kind of a permacultural demonstration site and educational space will attract local people in the area and surrounding villages like local farmers and indigenous people, including the youth and children.
Wow, that sounds like an amazing project. Can you tell us what is your concrete approach to being a community-based project? How is the neighborhood involved?
Most of the people who help us work in the land were mainly our comrades. In the local DIY punk and anarchist community, our network, we do have few local friends with both farmers and indigenous people. Some are neighbors who also give their time in helping us work in the land, share to us their skills like making traditional baskets and handicrafts, and also hike with us in the woods and had taught us some wild plant identification and other nature-related stuff. Even though they were also settlers in the place just like us, they had lived there for so many years already. So we are luckily had learned a bit of wisdom and direct knowledge from them about the subsistence living and awareness about the social and ecological situation in the area. We believe that listening and honoring the stories of the place and people motivated by respect and gratitude will eventually lead to a shared and common understanding and a sense of solidarity. In terms of interpersonal relationship among the local people and community. Most folks and residents in the forest work all the time at their own piece of land. When we came to the place in 2017, from time to time, we made friends and got to know some local people in the area, which matters most to us in creating a kind of mutual relationship, trust, and connection. Some of our local farmer friends supported our Food Not Bombs action in the city by donating their vegetables produced during the time of pandemic and lockdowns, where food is vitally needed during those times.
Before the recent elections, In recent elections, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., the son of the former dictator Marcos, was elected as president. What will change, if anything? And what does this change at the top mean for the Philippine politics in general?
Most people from the leftist scene, as much as the anarchist folks with left-leaning tendencies since the time of election campaign, had waged a protest against Marcos Jr. being elected as president due to his son of Ferdinand Marcos Sr., who became president for 20 plus years from 1965 to 1986 and was a known corrupt leader and a former dictator. Martial law was imposed during Marcos Sr. administration, and by that time, many resistors from the left and the New People's Army, an armed wing of the Communist Party of the Philippines, they were brutally repressed, detained, tortured, and many of them got killed, and many people also disappeared and not gotten back to their family. Furthermore, resource extractive industries such as the introduction of the so-called Green Revolution, agribusiness and biotechnology, building of dams and timber exportation, paved the way for massive deforestation and displacement of indigenous people from their ancestral lands under the Marcos Sr. regime. Today, many critics of Ferdinand Marcos Jr. believe that at the time of his electoral campaign early this year, the brutal crimes committed by the Marcoses in relation to martial law decades ago was fully twisted and distorted by means of current mainstream media, on television, also on social media, that resulted to the Marcoses family instantly became good personalities instead of a tyrant. Marcoses' history of corruption and the money they plundered in the past was still on their family's bank account, and Imelda Marcos, the mother of Marcos Jr., was recently being acquitted and cleared of such crime of corruption by the Supreme Court. During the election campaign, the Marcoses spent tons of money, millions of money via vote buying and other kinds of elitist manipulation to secure power, enabling Marcos Jr. to gain the presidential position last May. The vote buying here is just relevant where growing poverty resides. Even though electoral politics in the Philippines is truly a farce, majority of the population still believe in leaders, in political institutions for reforms and change in the hope to better their lives or eliminate corruption or crime or whatsoever as promised by reformers and politicians, but all to no avail, of course. It's still the same situation within representative politics everywhere worldwide, since all the politicians' elites from past years of administration until today are still sitting in political throne and hierarchy. They hold all government departments and the natural resources of the country and continues to accumulate wealth and tax people while spending lots of money for nonsense industrial infrastructure and developments for military arms, security and checkpoints, and other technology and tools of repression and other crazy stuff that is an antithesis to a peaceful and sane living.
Can you tell us more about anarchism in the Philippines and other projects active there? Is there a history of non-Western anarchism or libertarian practices?
Most local people who adhere to anarchism comes from the DIY punk movement, and others comes from the communist left scene, mainly those individuals who were disillusioned of the hierarchy and authoritarian nature of the centralized left. Other comes from the art and music scene and various loose subcultures. For more than a decade, Food Not Bombs action is undertaken by local DIY punks in many cities and towns of the archipelago. Till today, local Food Not Bombs chapters is growing, adhering to the politics of culture of sharing, horizontality, and mutual aid without any leaders or any representative of the movement. Many social centers and info shops also existed for more than a decade already, particularly in places located in the National Capital Region. Social centers and info shops are mostly run collectively. Other collective projects are into DIY media, arts, and organization of events, gigs, and outdoor gathering. There is also an anarchist formation of a more loose and informal network called Local Autonomous Network or LAN, involved in various campaigns in the past such as Sagada 11 Prisoner Support Campaign, the annual protest of the State of the Nation address by the President, anti-G8 protests, Occupy Luneta, and related events such as autonomous anarchy festivals and eco-gatherings and anti-state, anti-capitalist street demonstrations and protests. The SKA or Sining Kalikasan Aklasan is an annual ecological and art street action organized by the local autonomous network in coordination with other anti-authoritarian groups and individuals. Recent Food Not Bombs and Really Free Market action was held in Paki, Laguna, in coordination and solidarity with the local people there who oppose against Ahunan Dam project. It's an action between anarchist collectives, namely Defend Ecology Network and the local people's organization in Pakil, who oppose the dam project at their own town. Meanwhile, in Bacolod City in the Visayas region, the anarchist collectives there had taken some action against the road construction in an eco-protected park. In Bulacan, the anarchist collectives there also has made an action against an airport construction project. So a recent anarchist gathering happened in Bulacan as well, like months ago. The anarchist project and campaigns are currently active, especially in the National Capital Region and some provinces in Luzon and also in Bacolod and in Visayas region. Also, many anarchist collectives and individuals are also involved in helping people during aftermath of natural calamities such as typhoon and earthquake, floods and fire incidents. During the pandemic and lockdown, the community pantry was founded nationwide and it sprung, and the Food Not Bombs groups had been there to help people with free food and provision of medicines and other basic necessities. Mutual exchange in the grassroots level was really helpful and alive during the aftermath of calamities and during the pandemic.
And what kind of solidarity your project is needing? Can you share how people can get to know you?
If people want to support our project, it would be best if they could personally come to our space and help us on the project hands-on. People that had actual experiences on permaculture and land management, such as gardeners, farmers, natural builders, carpentry, artisans, craftspeople, herbalists, indigenous traditional knowledge, and other related skills for subsistence. We are grateful to learn from, to experience, and to share knowledge and affinity with. It could provide an empowering community that will help in healing the land and people in terms of self-determination and autonomy, and positivity on the physical, psychological, and spiritual level. Our land project is also run by donations, so monetary-wise or material-wise, if people want to help along this matter, we highly appreciate that and will always be a huge help to achieve some of our goals. To us, our space is more about life experiences and reconnection with nature, and we gladly wish to welcome our doors to everyone, to those who need it, and to those who feels the same. If you wish to help and connect and be part of our land project initiative, kindly email us at feralcrust@riseup.net. We do have a Facebook page as well called Feral Crust Info Shop.
Thank you so much for finding time to talk with us, to share your experiences, and we wish you strength and all the best to your project.
In behalf of Nika, thank you so much for the interview, comrades. We so highly appreciate it.
someone. My lord, your time has come right between the eyes. Felled his master not by chance, away with pomp and circumstance. Come join our merry dance to the rhythm of goodbye. Farewell the jewel crown, farewell the velvet gown. Watch it all come tumbling down. Goodbye to the crown. Goodbye to the crown. Goodbye to the king of nothing really. Wave of a hand and a life of Riley. Pot Nazi, pot King Billy. Goodbye to the crown. Goodbye to the dear old mum, mummified on gin and rum. Smile and wave and just play dumb. Goodbye to the crown. Farewell the jewel crown, farewell the velvet gown. Watch it all come tumbling down. Goodbye to the crown. Goodbye to the crown. Goodbye to the media whore and all her pious work for the poor and all the faces that she wore. Goodbye to the crown. Goodbye to the royal we and all its famous pedigree. Let's put this dog to sleep. Goodbye to the crown. Farewell the jewel crown, farewell the velvet gown. Watch it all come tumbling down. Goodbye to the crown. Farewell the jewel crown, farewell the velvet gown. Watch it all come tumbling down. Goodbye to the crown. Farewell the jewel crown, farewell the velvet gown. Watch it all come tumbling down. Goodbye to the crown. Farewell the jewel crown, farewell the velvet gown. Watch it all come tumbling down. Goodbye to the crown.
This is The Final Straw. This show will later be archived at thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org, and you can email us with questions and suggestions at thefinalstrawradio@riseup.net or thefinalstrawradio@protonmail.com. If you'd like to use any episode for your project or radio show, feel free to do so. Just send us an email to let us know. If you care to, you can send us letters at The Final Straw Radio, P.O. Box 6004, Asheville, North Carolina, 28816. This show is brought to you by Firestorm Books and Coffee. Located at 610 Haywood Road, Firestorm Books and Coffee is a worker-owned co-op in Asheville specializing in offbeat, underground, and independent literature. You can find a catalog of Firestorm's books and zines, plus a full calendar of events up at their website, firestorm.coop.
Her Majesty's a pretty nice girl, but she doesn't have a lot to say. Her Majesty's a pretty nice girl, but she changes from day to day. I wanna tell her that I love her a lot, but I've gotta get a belly full of wine. Her Majesty's a pretty nice girl, someday I'm gonna make her mine, oh yeah, someday I'm gonna make her mine. Her Majesty's a pretty nice girl, but she never does a thing for me. Her Majesty's a pretty nice girl, but she keeps the worst company. All her lords and her ladies in waiting, all crawling in the dirt like swine. Her Majesty's a pretty nice girl, but I hope she's the end of the line, oh yeah, I hope she's the end of the line. Her Majesty's living in a land of curtsies, a world of bluish blood and Nazis, yeah. Her Majesty's a pretty nice girl, but I think she ought to call it a day. Her Majesty's a pretty nice girl without one good reason to stay. I'd like to take her for a whiskey or two, but I've got a lot of things to do. Her Majesty's a throwaway song, just short of a chorus or two, oh yeah, short of a chorus or two. A world of corgis and inbreeding, the royal corpse is barely breathing. Her Majesty's a pretty nice girl with a circus for a family. Her Majesty's a pretty nice girl, but she's stuck with the royal we. I'd like to show her around the center of town, but I haven't got a copy for her feet. Her Majesty's a pretty nice girl, but she's pretty much obsolete, oh yeah.